everyone, and welcome to IDC Directions 2020 in Portugal. My name is Tom Zink, and I'm leading IDC's European Financial Services research. Today, I want to take you through what's going on in the financial services industry. And that really means how are financial services institutions dealing with the pandemic, and how are they really moving on from the challenges that they are facing in this absolutely new environment, and how some of them are also using this pandemic as an opportunity to really rethink their business, rethink their IT, and really look at ways to accelerate out of this crisis and really prevail in this extremely digital ecosystem and digital environment that we have seen emerging over the last couple of months. You may have seen this slide before. This is an IDC model of how we see organizations going through the pandemic. And this is really, I think, a model that applies not just to financial services, but it applies universally to pretty much any organization that's dealing with the fallout from the crisis. As you can see, obviously, we are in crisis, so there is a dip. And in the early onslaughts of phase number one, we really saw how financial institutions were rapidly rethinking the way they work. I mean, traditionally, financial services institutions are not really home working. It's not natural to financial institutions to have people working from home. So that was really massive transformation that happened within a couple of days and a couple of weeks, where banks suddenly had to move thousands of employees home and really build the collaborative infrastructure to really put in place operations that they could really drive through the pandemic in this early onslaught. As we went through the crisis, the focus has shifted, and that was really, I think, that the natural way of dealing with a crisis is you focus on your ROI. So that means focus on cost savings, focus on efficiency. And as we approach rock bottom, we are seeing obviously how banks are now looking at it in a different way. The crisis has become normal, and the focus is now shifting towards how can I build resiliency so that if something like this happens again, we're not really ending up in the same situation. But it's also about how do I accelerate out of this crisis. We already see how a couple of leading organizations that have done digital well are really already starting to accelerate out of this crisis. And then the focus is obviously, once we have this hole behind us, to really focus more on innovation in this new digital ecosystem and this digital environment that COVID-19 has shaped. Obviously, that also means that the focus of the use cases that banks have been prioritizing has shifted a bit. So you may be familiar with our DX taxonomies, where we identified use cases that we really think are critical to really drive digital transformation forward in a successful manner. And while many of those use cases have not really changed, they have, what has changed is the time frame. And what we really see in these early phases of the pandemic, the focus was clearly on Omni experience and customer engagement. Also, how do I optimize some of the operations that I'm having? So particularly lending was obviously a key focus, because that was really one of the key needs where banks had to move quickly, and they have a responsibility to the overall economy as well. So very focused approach around optimizing lending, automating some of the processes, and really get faster and really get also more interactive with the customers. In that early phase, obviously, security was another key focus. So we have seen, as we rapidly moved into this digital environment, how attacks have gone up, but also how banks have been heavily investing in security and really trying to deal with this new normal. And as we go deeper into the whole, the focus is really shifting towards some of the other areas. So efficiency and agility, I think, is the first and foremost. So how banks really rethink how they can build a future, how they can future-proof their business. And obviously, cloud will play a massive role in this. And this is something that we hear from CIOs really every day, that COVID really marks the launch of a lot more serious cloud initiatives, as the cloud obviously lends itself very good to working in this remote environment, to be able to shift workloads in order to have performance at your disposal when you need it, and also the ability to innovate, obviously. And then as we go out of the crisis, so we're going up the curve again now, the focus is again shifting, okay, how do I obviously improve my loan portfolio? How can I make my portfolio more healthy? There is obviously discussion around what's the new normal looking like in a digital ecosystem. So things like lifestyle banking, where you kind of bring together open banking with data-driven banking, and really trying to get closer to the customer is getting a lot more important. This is also the point where I wanted to spend a bit more time today to introduce some of the research that we've done over the last year. And one key area where we have really some new stuff is around Omni experience management. And we have done a consumer survey where we interviewed about 4,000 consumers across Europe. Unfortunately, there were not that many Portuguese respondents that I could pull out the numbers for them separately. But I think the numbers or the European consumers, they are differing at times a bit, but I think the overarching archetypes, they hold. And the only thing that we really see that maybe the time until these archetypes become more prominent is differing a bit from market to market, but not the nature of the archetypes. So in this survey, we asked the consumers a lot of questions, and that is obviously how they like to bank, the role of data, what is important when they talk to their banks. And we really came up with 5 consumer banking archetypes that are really looking at very different banking experiences. And I think this is really the essential takeaway. In the past, a lot of organizations have had obviously a rich digital offering, but they didn't really customize that to digital segments. And that is really the thing that we are recommending, because this one-size-fits-all approach is not really the way you can engage really fundamentally different customer archetypes. So we see obviously here the 2 main groups in Europe at the moment are urbanites. So consumers that really strive for a new banking experience, but then also the loyalists, which are consumers that have started to do a lot of research online, but they still value the human interaction. So they do research online, but if they want to buy something, they very often still want to have that human touch. Obviously, the rationalists and traditionalists, they are a bit in the middle of that. And then we have those strivers. And these are really the tough nut to crack for financial services, because this is the young generation. This is the generation X, Y, Z, whatever you want to call it. And these are people that live online, that live and breathe online, and that really have grown up with the big banking scandal in the global financial crisis. So trust in banking has really been fundamentally challenged. And they are really not looking for a extremely rich banking experience. They just see it as something that's necessary, but is not something that they really want to spend a lot of time with. So when I move to slide number 5, it's really about, you can see how these different archetypes are differing in the way they use digital channels, but also how strong the relationship they have with their bank is. And then we also wanted to go into, take a bit of a look into the future and really understand how banks need to future-proof their business model in order to, well, build a revenue model that is working in the future, as we are probably going to stay in this low interest environment, And also transaction business has been marginalized, as we see that's really becoming a commodity. So thinking about new ways to earn money with your customers, and that really means more customer-centric services that really provide a value add to the customer. So I'm not gonna go to all the points here, but the essential takeaway is really, we have these 5 different consumer segments. They all have very different expectations to what their banks should provide. And at the moment, well, pretty much no banks are offering a channel or a segment-specific digital proposition. And that is something that we are really recommending to revisit or to think through, because this really allows you to play at the strengths that, or at the expectations that those customers have, and really allows you to also support them in a way that is perceived as value adding to them. So lastly, some thoughts of how banks should really be working with their customers and engaging their customers throughout this crisis. So I think it's really, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. So what's really becoming essential is to help customers with financial advice. And I think this is really giving them recommendations on how they can plan their personal finances. And particularly in this crisis environment, this is an opportunity for banks to really position themselves as a trusted advisor that can help a customer really navigate the complexity and the uncertainty that's out there in the market. As there is crisis, there is obviously also the need to take a better look and understand what's going on. So, and also minimize for instance, the fees that your consumers will have to pay. So actionable reminders, really staying in touch at a much higher frequency is increasingly important for the consumer. And I think this is something that banks need to build out in a better way. Same applies obviously when it comes to fraud. So transaction alerts and really keeping customers informed of what's going on in their account is, I think, table stakes today. And now we come to some of the more fancy things. So elements of gamification. I think on the low end, you have spending goals, rewards, discounts, and those things. But I think there is obviously a lot of innovation also coming from the fintech industry on how to really get people to apply their behavior in a favorable manner. And gamification is really a great element that can really set and change behaviors in a way that the banks want to really drive the consumers. And lastly, obviously, we are entering the era of data-driven financial services. So really moving away from segment-based sales and really these segment-based customer communications, and really trying to bring that down to the element of one, and at least give the customer the feeling that the bank knows the customer and that they understand what they need. On the next slide, I was really wanting to give you a new framework that we have to be developing. And whenever we talk about innovation, one thing that comes up pretty quickly is the legacy infrastructure and the inability to really upgrade that to a digital, world where innovation and speed and agility is critical. And very often this conversation then ends up around the core. We have seen for a long time that banks that have tried to replace their core banking system with these big bang approaches have not really been extremely successful with it. Simply because there's so much change and there's so much money that's sunk into it that's really preventing you from doing other things. So technology has matured these days, and now we have a lot more options of how we can really modernize our legacy and how we can modernize our core banking system. And this model really puts together different approaches depending on the age of your core banking system. So we're starting at the left bottom corner, where this is really old age core banking systems, so systems that are more than 25 years old. So you really have that challenge that the digital interfaces and the digital functionality is not there. So what we are recommending here is to put a digital skin on it. So the digital skin then calls from the enterprise service bus and is really allowing you to do some more interesting and innovative things on the front end within the digital skin. It's still operating in a batch mode, but you are moving closer to while the core remains old, that digital skin gives customers at least that feeling that you're moving into a more real-time and a more immediate relationship. So moving up to the top left, so these are core banking systems that are between 15 and 25 years old. So here we are talking about building a digital enterprise service bus. So you abstract some of the development layers and to really focus on providing efficiency gains and really add new digital functions that can really change the customer experience. And this is already having benefits over that digital skin model because you have significantly lower legacy cost, and it's much easier to run with this digital enterprise services bus. Moving on to the right-hand side, here we are really going into the more digitized core. So this is what we have been talking about over the last 2-3 years. It's about modernizing that service-oriented architecture that most banks have put in place and really upgrading that with granular microservices and exposing some of the functionality via APIs. It's really about increasing the number of digital transactions, and that will, having successfully moved to this digitalized core, is really having a massive impact on the legacy cost and also on your ability to drive innovation within the core. And then lastly, on the top right, we are talking about this organic digital core. So this is a core banking system that's usually less than 5 years old or sometimes even less. So very lean development layers. It's focusing on really robust digital functionalities that can be easily added through internet and mobile banking apps. And it has been really completely rebuilt in a microservices architecture. And here, the benefit is obviously much lower legacy cost or no legacy cost at all. And you are able to really move towards that real-time element that customers may not be looking for yet, but this is likely to be the future because that's where expectations are going. Lastly, I wanted to quickly talk about the cloud. I have already mentioned earlier, cloud is really seeing the sea change. We have seen that already happening in the last 2 years, but we really believe that COVID will amplify the cloud migration for a lot of organizations out there. And I think what a lot of organizations are still kind of working through is the complexity and the many options that they have. So there is obviously public cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, private cloud, and so on. And I think there is, particularly on the business side, there is a lot of uncertainty about what is the direction to take and how to deal with that. And as you can see, we have broken apart the organizations here. Some more mature organizations are clearly focusing more on moving into the public cloud or building hybrid cloud approaches that give them the flexibility to run their workloads wherever they feel they should be. And there have been obviously a lot of announcements over the last couple of months where organizations have really boldly stated their cloud strategy and the direction they see for their business. So I wanted to end with a quick overview over some of the key approaches and some of the key benefits and challenges that we see with those different approaches. So I think hybrid cloud has been identified as one of the most prominent approaches for financial services because it gives you that flexibility to run your workload wherever you want, whether that is in the public cloud, whether that's in a private cloud, or it's in your own data center. So it's about getting ready and then moving workloads once you're comfortable with that infrastructure that you want to move to. And obviously, among the advantages here is it's a very progressive approach. You don't have to make decisions today that you then will be struggling with tomorrow. It gives you the choice to move workloads whenever you feel ready. And but on the other hand, it comes with added complexity, so to speak. So it is really you have to start with rebuilding your legacy infrastructure, abstract the business logic, build that microservices architecture, and really try to move off those legacy organizations and then really put everything in the containers and redevelop that entire spiel. And that is really adding a lot of complexity to an organization. And I think that is something, a lot of banks have started that, but they realize it's not that easy, but it is a very functional way of addressing the most important issues first, and then kind of progressively move into the new world. Native clouds, whenever you obviously talk to the big hyperscalers, they will clearly tell you, no, you should move everything to our public cloud. And there is clearly a lot of advantages that come from moving yourself to or associating yourself with a particular cloud vendor, because they do invest a lot in innovation. You have the speed, you have the rich services portfolio, very often also tools that can help you drive your AI strategy. And they really provide a lot of support, and it's actually cost effective. Once you kind of move more workloads to a particular cloud provider, you get better pricing. And I think this is really the selling point that a lot of the cloud providers are moving into or promoting at the moment. And it's really moving towards this, I just consume IT, I don't care where it runs, how it runs, that's somebody else's problem. But it obviously comes with the cost of that vendor lock-in. And I think that is really one area that we hear a lot from our banking customers, that they are afraid to put all their breads in one basket. And after being locked into legacy software for so long, I think they are very careful of making that same mistake in the terms of infrastructure as well. There is also downtime risk. I think when you look at the statistics, cloud providers are providing extremely high availability, but it is what it is. There is the possibility of downtimes, but you also have that in your own data center. So it is really a give and take, and I don't think this still has to be this key reason why you cannot move into the cloud. And lastly, and I think multi-cloud is really one thing that we have been hearing a lot more about in the last year or so, as organizations are recognizing there is this risk of the vendor lock-in. So they try to really build applications across different cloud providers. And obviously, you prevent too much exposure. If you do that in an active manner, you can have actually once one cloud provider goes down, you still have your operations running. But on the other hand, it is extremely complex to do that, because developing applications in different cloud environments is not as easy as it seems. And if you do that across multiple environments, this is adding a lot of complexity. And I think we already realized that this is also driving cost immensely. So multi-cloud is a great idea, but it is somehow still stuck a bit in the mindset of, I need to kind of put my breads into different basket, but in the cloud that makes less sense. So it's really an interesting discussion to have with your cloud providers, and I really urge you to have those. So in summary, European FSI are still bracing for the fallout from COVID. The focus is now shifting towards business resiliency, and we are really seeing how the focus is expanding from those tactical projects towards more strategic transformation focus, where you modernize your infrastructure and also focus on platformization of internal systems, but also working with the overall ecosystem. Second, taking digital all the way really requires a rethinking of the channel experience. And I want to emphasize it again, not all customers are expecting the same service in this digital world. So channel segmentations will really allow banks to build and position new services to segments that are really interested in it, and that really help segments that are maybe less digital savvy with upgrading them and kind of familiarizing them with this digital world. So I think we have to move away from this one-size-fits-all approach and really look at different digital experiences and give the customer choice about what kind of experiences they're looking for. Lastly, in order to really succeed with this more strategic, or with the final phases of the pandemic, where we focus on acceleration, innovation, it is essential to think about the benefits of infrastructure modernization. So the core has and will remain a critical obstacle towards really upgrading and innovating and being more agile and moving faster. And we really urge you to look at the different options that you have to digitalize your core. And clearly, cloud will be a critical enabler of this modernization effort. With that, I want to thank you for your interest, and have a great IDC Directions 2020. Thank you very much.